Welcome to Coding After Work stream. We are live.
We are.
Yeah. And happy holidays. We're dressed accordingly.
Yep.
Yeah. At least some nerd references there.
You're much nicer than I.
Well, I'm a crazy cat lady, so I thought it was appropriate.
I would definitely not look as good in dress. So.
Huh. That's something that's something we should look into the next year. So happy holidays to everyone. It seems that every time we stream, we have something to celebrate. And speaking about streaming and also celebrating, it couldn't be possible, or it wouldn't be possible without our amazing sponsors.
Yeah. So the first one we have is Progress Telerik. And Telerik supports the development community with, for example, sponsoring streams like these. And they also have amazing Blazor components. And chances are that they have what you need. Currently, they have more than 60 truly native components.
And to clarify, that means that instead of just taking their JavaScript libraries and adding Blazor containers around them, they're written in C# and Blazor, or for Blazor. And we also have another sponsor, 1337, which is a knowledge-driven consultancy company that specializes in innovative, custom-built software solutions. And they're also very active in the community, which we like.
So thank you so much for helping us do things like this.
But now, let's bring in our guest. Welcome, Egil Hansen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Are you ready for Christmas?
Well, I don't know how it is where you live, but here in Iceland, it's been snowing since I think 2 months ago. So I think if White Christmas is something you get ready for, then we definitely are here. It's
nice.
It's dark and snowy and beautiful up here in the northern parts of Iceland, where I'm currently at.
Nice. We had 1 day of almost snow. There was snow falling, but it didn't stick. So it's still autumn temperature, I would say.
Okay, well,
Sweden
to me seems like it should be snowing in Sweden, right? It's part of the fairy tales, at least.
Yeah,
maybe of the northern parts of Sweden.
Definitely. Well, if you go up there, I think they will have a little bit snow, at least more than we do. How is it at least in Scandinavia, we celebrate St. Lucia or Lucia. Is that something you celebrate on Iceland?
I'm fairly new up here. My wife is from up here. I know we did it in Denmark, where I'm from, but in Iceland, I haven't actually seen anything, but I haven't sort of been part of the the traditional things they have in daycare and school where my kids are at right now. So I don't think so. But we have a lot of up here. Their Christmas traditions involve like 13 or 11 elves. And like an old mother of those guys that eat children. So, and there's a lot of so, and if you don't get socks in a Christmas gift, then you get eaten by the evil Christmas mother, I guess it's called in English. So the Christmas fairy tales up here are a bit more rough than average. But
well, if you look at fairy tales in general, the original versions are really savage and horrible. Really, it's the rewritten Disney versions that we can muster, I think.
Yeah. I was listening to some just audiobooks of the old H.C. Andersen fairy tales, and people die in those stories. And it's just and then he died, and there's no happy ending all the time. so it's different time, I guess, we live in now.
Yeah, definitely. And also we have internet, so we can fact check everything.
Yeah.
Did he really die?
Did the wolf actually eat her? The red what is it? Red Riding Hood? Yeah. So what day do you open gifts in Iceland? I know in a few of European countries are opening on the 24th, and the rest of the world opens on the 25th.
So in Denmark and Iceland, the tradition is to open in the evening on the 24th after Christmas dinner. I'm pushing a bit for in our family because we have a 3 and a 6-year-old, and it's very hard for them to be up all day looking at all the gifts under the Christmas tree and then sitting down quietly eating dinner for 1 hour or more. And then when they are at their most tired in the day, they have to sit and then they can open their Christmas gifts. So I'm trying to sort of, I actually like the, maybe not on 25, but the American version, the classic, where they basically get up in the morning and open the gifts in the morning, because then kids have all day to play with their new toys and don't have to go to bed right away. But we'll see if I can challenge tradition a little bit in the family or not.
That kind of makes more sense.
It does. Yeah. I know some countries actually open on midnight, so they sit up and wait and open at midnight as well. But that would be difficult for a child, and they need to behave all day.
How do you do it in Sweden? Is it also on 24th?
Yeah, we there's a few different variations, but one thing is common for basically everyone, and that we watch Donald Duck, the holiday special at 3. And then it's either some people get gifts before, some people get gifts right after. We do it after. But we also actually do a Christmas lunch instead of a Christmas dinner, because
that's true.
The days are so long and you need to do the dishes, and there's a lot of dishes for Christmas for some reason.
Yeah. Well, that actually makes sense to do a Christmas lunch instead. Well, no, I think I'll, settle by challenging one tradition at the time. So maybe going for opening presents around 2 p.m. That would be that's sort of a tradition here in Iceland to have. They call it coffee time, even in daycare. But it's just around the time where you meet with your grandparents and eat and drink coffee and eat cake. But I guess the kids don't drink coffee, but they could have gifts afterwards. So,
yeah. That's basically, you described Swedish fika, I think. It's that part of the day you do something and just sit down.
Social, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And usually it involves some sugary stuff.
Totally.
Awesome. Should we dive in?
Yeah, if you're ready.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah. Yes, So you invited me very kindly to come and talk a bit about testing Blazor components. And I've been on a few things, a few podcasts and the Blazor stand-up, community stand-up the last few months. So I thought, instead of just redoing the same presentation again and again, we could try something different here. And we will still go over the basics, but I thought since you, Jimmy, have a library that seems on the surface very testable with bUnit, let's try to do that. And I even gave you some homework and asked you to think about what kind of things we want to verify with your project. So, and starting with the most simple things and just building on top of that. So let me
finally testing for Blossom.
I know, right? Egil is like, well, do you have something that we could test? I do.
Everything.
Okay, so let me jump around here a bit, and I am sharing my screen, I think. So if you,
yes, you are.
Okay, so what I have here for the folks at home watching, this is the Blossom. Is that right? Blossom.
I really like puns. So the name comes from that. The company that Jessica and I has is called Awesome Dev. So the AZM part is awesome. And then the BLZ part is Blazor. So blossom, and it will make your applications blossom. I'm sorry. I really like
No, it's okay. It's okay. I named bUnit, which is my library. It was called the Razor Component Testing Library originally. Very Microsofty, wordy product name.
About to say that.
Version 7.
Yeah. And I've, at some point when I tried to Google that, I had all the right magic words there, but those combined meant a lot of other pages were coming up in front of mine because testing and Blazor and Razor and component, that was just generic. And then it hit me that bUnit is a much more obvious name and also actually indicates a little bit, actually this should indicate to people what's going on. It's a unit testing framework for Blazor. But anyway, as I said, we have your solution here, and this is bUnit's website. I've written quite a lot of documentation, and if we go into the getting started, we want to start by first creating a test project. So you can do that from the command line, or you can do it through Visual Studio. So let me just show you how to do it through Visual Studio. And by the way, if you are trying to follow this guide down here, I just noticed this afternoon that there's actually a small bug in my template. So, but that should be fixed hopefully in a day or two. Anyway,
you might want to resize the text a little bit.
Of course.
There we go.
Yeah.
Now perfect. Even I can read it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Telerik is also Progress is also supporting me. So. Additional shout outs to them besides what you already gave them. Yeah. So but anyway, so bUnit is, I call it a library instead of a framework, because what it actually does, it builds on top of a testing framework like XUnit or NUnit or MS Test. So anywhere you can run one of those testing frameworks, and that's basically everywhere where you can run .NET Test, the command line tool, there you can run bUnit. So what we will want to add here first is a new project, and I didn't ask you if you prefer XUnit, but I'm gonna do that because that's what I know. So hopefully you also like that. And let's find the right place to put it. I think in this folder should be fine, and call it Blossom components.tests, and we want 5.0, right? Yep.
It is released, so
it is released. Yeah. And so now we need to do a few things to make this work. First, we can go in here in Dependencies. And since we want to test the components in your Blossom components project, we add a reference to that, just like we do with any sort of normal unit testing component library setup, or just production code over here, and you have unit testing here, and you have a pointer from the production or from the test project over to the whatever you want to test. So nothing special here. Another thing we need to tweak is to add .razor here to the project type. You need that if you want to use like bUnit supports a way of writing unit tests using Blazor syntax. That can be advantageous sometimes if, for example, you have a lot of parameters you want to pass to your components. So maybe we'll switch to that mode at some point later today, if that makes sense for the test we're going to write for you. But otherwise, you can see this is just a regular XUnit project. Now we need to add a dependency for bUnit. So let's just go browse to that. Type in bUnit, and here we have to click include pre-releases. So bUnit is still still has a beta stamp on it. I think it's fairly stable. The next release will be a preview, which means I will do my very best. Unless there's really something important, I won't change any of the APIs going forward, and only do tweaks and performance tweaks and bug fixes if there are any. But it's quite usable already, and you can see there's plus 50,000 downloads already. So it's in fairly good use already out in the community. So let's install version 11 and just wait a small bit. And we talked about before whether you liked fluent assertions or shouldly or just the regular XUnit. Let me install fluent assertions because that's what I'm using now in day-to-day work. So we have a little bit of help. Let's just not take the beta, just take the final version of that.
Chicken.
Only yeah, only bUnit gets to be in beta, right? And so that should be it. So now we have bUnit, we have fluent assertions, we have XUnit runner, and that should be it, if I remember correctly. Oh, one little trick I've learned from Microsoft from their coding guidelines is to set the namespace in your test project to be the same as in the project you're testing. That way you don't have to add all the using statements in all the files. You just get the same namespace set up as you would in your project you're testing. So normally the namespace of the project would be the same as the CSproj file, which would be blazor.component.tests. But in this case, we're just going to say, well, we're just going to keep it as blazor.components.
That's handy.
Okay, so yeah, we can work with this one. So to write a test. Well, let's actually just run this test and see if everything builds and everything compiles, and we have green lights, so we can go, and I can add my test explorer down here. And yeah, it's sort of lying to us, right? It says 4 milliseconds, but it clearly did take longer, but that was probably build time. Anyway, so what I usually will recommend people doing is, so you can see here, there's writing test in C#. There's also writing test in Razor syntax. And there are a few warnings here. One of them is that you need to use XUnit right now to do that. And you also have to make sure that you set the right project type as well as we did. But if you want to do that, then you can write your test in here. But I think we're going to stick with just C# test for now.
What is your recommendation? Is your recommendation to do it in C# or
I right now I would I prefer to do it in C# unless I have something very specific. Also because this I would consider still a sort of experimental for now. I actually have a new version of the next version of bUnit that's coming out that has support for doing this in an even nicer syntax than we have in here right now. So I would. I think it would be better if I think people would be better to wait a little bit by using this. But I also know, for example, if you know C# Fridge or I guess he's sort of a famous Twitch guy for at least in the developer community. He's using this Razor syntax more or less exclusively on his projects, on his Blazor projects. So it works, and it works quite well. I just personally prefer this style unless I have a lot of parameters to pass in. So what I recommend doing, especially if you're using XUnit, is to take the XUnit test context, the one we have here. That is the one that allows us to render component. So and just have your unit test class inherit from that. So test context, and we need to add bUnit. Now, this is the time I'm going to ask you, Jimmy, what is the first test we want to write? What is the most simple thing we can do to test your project?
I guess the most simple way would be just to see that it creates a table if we're not supplying any parameters at all.
Okay, so that would be the Blazor grid component we want to test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have some unnecessary space up here, Jimmy.
Burn!
Well, it's more obvious when you are at a very low resolution with very large fonts. I'm gonna let this one slide. Yeah, so
you need to go in and fix the rest of them.
I had no idea that this is what was going to be a roast.
That was the nicest roast ever. You have a few lines. If that is a roast to you, I'm sorry.
That's how good I am.
Yeah. Well, you haven't shocked me yet. I've seen worse. So let's rename this class just for good measure to Blazor grid test. And I want to move. Redo the namespace. Actually, let's see. So this guy, he's under grid, but I think you override the namespace in here. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's just keep him like. Well, I like to actually keep the structure the same. So let's call this guy grid. And by the way, what I just did there is a small nifty plugin called add new file, where you can just type in the things you want, like folders or files, and it'll just create it for you without having going to the file new the new file dialog, which can sometimes be slow. Okay, so now things are structured.
That is seriously one of the best plugins ever.
Yeah,
especially when working with Blazor, I think.
Yep. Yeah, because you have to create a lot of Razor files, right? So, so this test should be called something about like will what's it called? Render columns. What was it again? We wanted to test. We wanted to test that as well.
This would only be the table. So basically, just trigger the component to see if something blows up.
Okay. So we'll render empty table, right? Without anything in it. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So in bUnit parlor, I have the term component under test, or CUT for short. So anybody familiar with testing or testing terminology might sort of see the resemblance to SUT, which is system under test, which is sort of general purpose description of anything you want to test. But since we're testing components, I thought it would be fun to call it CUT instead. So inside the test context, it gives us a few methods that we can use to render component. So the question I sometimes get is, well, why can't I just go new Blazor grid? No, what's it called? Blazor grid of strings. Why can't I just do it like this? And you can. There's no compile errors here. And if I run the test, it will even run the test. The problem is I only get access to the instance of, and you can see we have all your nice properties here, and you have some methods in here. But this, just doing the component up, it doesn't actually test it. It doesn't actually render it. It doesn't produce any markup. So in Blazor, we have a clear separation of concerns between the components that define what markup should be produced, and the thing that produces the markup, in our case, it's going to be bUnit's test renderer, which builds on top of Blazor's native test renderer, or native rendering engine. And when you're running in the browser, the output of the component would be something that would be rendered into markup and put into the browser, either be it server side or client side. But so we need something to help us actually render a component in a testing context and get access to the markup that is produced when we render the component. We need a way to control the lifecycle methods of the component we want to test, so that we can test, first render and subsequent renders and all sorts of things. So that's what bUnit essentially does. So instead of newing up our component, we're going to say render component, and we're going to give it the Blazor grid. Now, since your component is a template component of sorts, or at least something that takes the type of items you want to show in your table, we have to give it something like what the items in the data would be. So we can just give it string for now. And so this would just render it out, and we can, this would, if it doesn't work, it'll throw. So let's just run this guy and see what happens. And
let me guess, 4 milliseconds.
So the problem, problem with let's not panic. The thing is, the Blazor compiler, which is still in play, it takes a little bit of time, and then the compiler, C# compiler, takes a little bit of time. So I hope and shout out everybody if you can't read what the error message says here. Is it large enough? I don't know if I can zoom in here.
It's a little bit small, maybe.
Okay,
I'm seeing it on this screen.
Let me see if I can.
I think it's fine.
Okay,
hopefully, that's
now
better.
It should be better. Yeah. Okay, so it says cannot provide a value for property listener of type Blazor grid, and let's scroll a bit. Blah 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 blah. Okay. I'm going to zoom out again and just tell you what it says. So what it's complaining about, it says there is no registered service for type Blazor Pro, Blazor Resize, Resize listener. So Blazor components, they can take dependencies and things. They can have things injected into them. And I'm guessing that if we go in and have a look at your component, and I guess we have to go into the Blazor grid.razor.c as the backend file, we will see a few injected services. So we have one service that is injected, that is the IIJS runtime, and then we have a second service which is also injected, and this is the resize listener. And that is, so bUnit is complaining now and saying, well, I can't inject the resize listener because you haven't told me about it. So this is exactly the same as you do in we have your sample app down here. You have a startup file, and you say add grid, I guess, or was it use Blazor? Sorry.
Add Blazor.
Yeah, add Blazor. Yeah. So
that's the second burn. I haven't updated my sample code.
Okay.
I changed the API.
Fair enough, Jimmy. Self burns are the best kind, right? So you have at least updated your documentation. So it basically tells us we need to call the add Blazor method, which will set up the necessary services. So sometimes
you went halfway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Because XUnit will run the constructor every time we run a test, we can just do it in the constructor, because we're probably going to do this in all our test cases. So another thing that bUnit comes with is a services collection, just like you have in your program.cs or anywhere else, basically, where you're using Microsoft dependency injection type. And we actually have both add grid and add Blazor. So let's do what the documentation tells us to. Okay, so let's try to run again and see if it stops complaining about this. So this is an example where we see how we can add services. And if you have a service that you need to mock, maybe you have a data service in your project, or maybe you're testing a Blazor application that pulls data in from an external service, and that is exposed to the components through a service that is injected into them, then you can go in and register maybe a mock or fake version of that data service and have more control of that. So now we are all green. So basically now we can render the component. So what should we look a bit at the markup that is generated and see that we get a table, or what do you want to do here? Should we
so I don't remember exactly what it's supposed to render at this point. I believe it's a table, and
so we can have a look. So at the minimum, you're basically telling us, well, we need a table, and we want to have something like this. We want to have a table with this property, and then you have some column that is being added. Then you have some group by and
so let's start with saying that what should be rendered is a table tag.
Okay, so we're gonna find the table tag. So if you've worked with jQuery before, you will recognize this. This is the find method. It takes a CSS selector. You could also, if you wanted to inspect the whole DOM tree. So bUnit doesn't use a browser. So if you are thinking this is UI testing using Selenium or something like that, there's no browser involved in this at all. That also means tests generally run very, very fast compared to using something like Selenium or another headless solution like Puppeteer or what have you, because there's no browser that needs to spin up in the background and be all instrumented and such. But we do use another great library called AngleSharp that basically can take the raw markup we have and turn that into a DOM tree, and it has the full HTML5 APIs, from the browser available inside it. So you can go into nodes, and then you have your query selector all, and all of those methods are available to you if you want to just traverse the DOM tree. I've made some of them more easily available by having a find and a find all method, but we're going to assume that that's going to be a single table in here.
Hopefully.
Just put it in. Hopefully, yes. And if we want to, should we verify something about that table besides that it is there? Should we can, for example, check that it has the right, something like this, I guess, something like that, maybe. So, and we can say, well, there's something called a class list in a table, and we can say should contains, and here we can contains, and what should it contain? Table, and should be true. Let's see if I can get Fluent versions to work. Yep, and we also want to have table script in there. We could also just use get attribute. There's many ways to, and say, give me the class attribute, and say that it's, do I get here? I get a string, and that should be, so let's short circuit a bit here and say that should be equal to table, something like that. And if we run our test again,
this is super exciting. Is it going to be green?
So we went green again. So we were able to find a table with that class attribute. So one thing I could show you, because we might actually, I don't know if you just render anything else. There's another thing we can do. We can say table, and we can say markup matches. Markup matches is a special assertion method I bring in with bUnit. It will do a semantic comparison of the markup of the table, in this case, and all its children. And by semantic, it means semantic from a HTML browser perspective. So in HTML and in the browser, insignificant whitespace, like the ones we moved up here, they don't matter. So the browser will still print out a table, and it will look exactly the same to the end user. It also doesn't matter if we change the order of these. The table will still look the same. So when I say it does a semantic comparison, it knows to ignore the order of class attributes. It knows to ignore the order of attributes in general. It knows how to ignore. It knows how to ignore the order of attributes. Did I say that already? Yeah, I went into a loop, I guess. So what we can do is we can say, well, I expect there to be a table that looks. Let me just get my copy paste right here. That looks a bit like this, and so now this is not right. So obviously we don't have an ID we have an ID that has something like this in it, table with something else. And that's something that's generated. So that's generally kind of hard to work with. But what we also support is modifiers in our code. But let me just comment out this here, and let me run it again, because I'm pretty sure we're going to see this fail now, and we can look at the error message. So we're going to go a little bit slow now and see a few options we have for asserting and understand a bit of what's going on here. So let me actually do something else. Let me pull this out, so have it like this as its own window, and then I can zoom in again. So as you see here, what we are getting in our assertion error, it's telling us that the actual HTML we are getting is this, and the expected HTML was obviously not quite there. So you are basically rendering out a table that looks like this, with a few, actually 2 table bodies and 1 table head and a TR. If that's not important to us initially, we can, and I do hope I remember all the syntax, but we can say, so the first thing we want to fix is we are obviously not going to get this right, because I assume this is something you generate dynamically every time you render something, or at least the first time you render tables, so we can't really assert against that. But what we can do is we can say, well, just treat this as a regex, and then we can go in here and say, well, anything from here and out, that shouldn't be a problem. And that will mean that it will make sure that the ID attribute starts with table, but the rest of it, if my regex skills are somewhere, if they're still okay, maybe it should be not, I don't want to capture group, like something like that, then that should match any other text that comes after that, basically. We could also just say, well, I don't really care about this. This is just something I have in there for some use. So I can just say, just ignore this attribute, and I won't. We don't want to assert against that. So let me jump back here to the documentation and show what other options we have. So under here, customize the semantic HTML comparer, we can see the different options we have. So we can just diff ignore, which will ignore the attribute, will ignore the entire element. That's not really what we want in this case. This guy will just ignore the class attribute, and then we can also change how the white space is sort of matched. We can change it to different styles if we want to. For example, if we, are dealing with a p tag, a pre-tag, PRE, then you normally want it actually to assert on the white space, because then that's important. Like if you're showing code on screen, then you want the right indentations there. So then you want then it actually, so by default it actually changes it out. It understands also the markup matches, also understands that now we are looking at a pre-tag, so now the white space is significant. But if you want to change it over so it's not significant, you can control that like this. You can also tell it to ignore case if you don't want to be case sensitive, and so on and so forth. So that's the first part. And if we run the test again, I can just go in here and click run. We should see, hopefully, if I get my regex right, that it at least stops complaining about the attribute. So you might be wondering, what is the advantage of doing something like this and using markup matches and being so precise with your markup and saying, I want exactly this as the output? And well, the advantage is that you are very certain that things don't change, but the things haven't broken. What markup matches give you is a way to be as loose as you can while still being strict, meaning that if I go in and change this around and run the test, then it shouldn't start complaining about there's something wrong with the class attribute. It should still continue to work. And so let's just cheat a little bit and copy paste in here from our results. Oh, I need to, can I just do it like this? So it's trying to be helpful and formatting things for me. And
at least it tried.
Yeah, I have a plugin called Smart Paster, which helps quite a lot, but not always, as you see. Okay, so now we are, I guess, quite strict, but we still loose enough that we are ignoring some things in here. And obviously, this doesn't match exactly what you have in your component, because we have a lot of white space here to the left, which you obviously don't have here. But since markup matches already sort of understands that, now we should have our test passing. So that is sort of how our hello world for Blazor that sort of asserts that this is what we always want to have, and when we do basic, just render a basic Blazor component. So I guess that is the first test, Jimmy. Are you happy with this?
Awesome. I am.
Yeah. So what should we test
green.
next? And it's green. Yeah, that's the most important thing. I like those small green check marks. And so you can also ask, what is the workflow? Right now, we're sort of cheating a bit, because you can just render your markup and use markup matches and then copy paste in what you sort of get when because you already built the component. If you want to do this test-driven development style, this actually also works out quite nicely. Maybe you have a designer that has already done all the hard work of figuring out what the markup should look like, and maybe provide some CSS as well and some JavaScript for you, and you just have to make everything actually come to life. Then test-driven development becomes quite easy in bUnit, because then you can plug in your markup like we just did here, and then you can start writing a component and create a code on it until you get the markup you expect out for the scenario you want to. Now we're doing it in the opposite direction, and that's fine as well. And then I think it's also quite fine to cheat, well, not cheat, but basically just copy paste the actual markup out and say, well, this is what we currently expect. So if you at some point in a little bit later go, changes something somewhere else in Blazor Grid, and you certainly start seeing test break, then you will know, well, okay, I changed something that shouldn't have broken, and then you can go in and either fix the test or change the test, or you will be alerted that there's something that's broken now. So that also makes this very good for regression testing, catching things like this. So the next test.
So there are 3 different ways to add columns, or it's actually the same way of adding columns, but there are 3 different ways of getting the name of the columns. So one way is getting it with a display attribute. So on the class, you would have a display attribute, and you would get the name from there.
Oh, yeah, okay. Samples, is it? Here we go. Yeah, so this is the...
Yes.
Yeah. So you have some sort of test class with some data in it, and you say comes from attribute, okay? And there were 2 others.
Yeah, and you can set the title attribute or the property, of course, on the grid column.
Yeah.
Or you can just leave it out, and you would get the default name, which is the name of the property.
Okay. So should we can test all 3. That should be interesting. So which one do we want to start with?
Let's start with the display attribute.
Okay. So for that, we will need a renders column name based on display attribute. Something like that.
Yep.
You know, naming is hard.
Hardest part.
Yeah.
Naming.
We're up to a good start.
Okay. So I'm guessing we're gonna need some test data. So let's create a class down here called data. And I believe you had one in here. We can just steal, or at least just keep things very, very simple. So you even call it test class. Here we go.
It's like you knew.
Yeah, and the names of the properties are really imaginative.
Yeah.
The string is called, wait for it, string.
No.
String. Yeah. Okay.
Then how would I know what it is?
Yeah. So display, is it the system component model data annotation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. So so we still need a cut. We're gonna say render component. Say render component. We're gonna be Blazor grid, and this time we're gonna put in some data. In case you're wondering, and we need. So now it's actually now we get to show off another thing that bUnit helps with. So now we need to pass in some test data. So because I'm lazy, I'm gonna go ahead and add a dependency for a library called Fixture that will help us just generate some data based on the types we need. So let's install this guy. Do you know Fixture already?
No.
No. So Fixture is just something that you can ask to say, I'm gonna need some data. So create some instances of data and give this some random data in it. And that's just what it does. So let's add a private fixture and call it fixture, new. Oh, so that's gonna be auto fixture. So we gotta have some naming classes here. Interesting. So I also have something in bUnit called a fixture, but also fixture has a type called fixture. So we're gonna use that one. And so here we can have our test data, and we just tell the fixture to create. I guess we would want to pass in a list.
Yes.
Of data.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need some connections in here as well. And I need to add. I actually haven't used AutoFixture before. with bUnit. So this is going to be interesting. See if everything blows up in my face. Living on the edge. Okay, so this will give us a list of data items with some random content in the string created by AutoFixture. So now we need to pass in that data to our component. So normally you do this. Where do we have an example? You do this by setting the data property. So we'll do the same thing. And so how we do that there's a few ways to do that, a few ways of doing that in bUnit. One of them is using the strongly typed builder pattern, which I prefer because then I can refactor my components without having my test break. So basically you pass in something that looks like this, a lambda that takes a parameter builder. It has some methods on it. One of them is called add, and that add method takes two parameters. It takes a parameter selector. So in our case, we want to select the data property. So P right now refers to the type of component we're trying to render, and I call it parameter, a P for parameter, I guess. And then you say, well, we want to pass data into the data property. Well, I guess in Blazor parlor, that's parameter, the data parameter. And what do we want to pass into it? We want to pass in our test data. And then it's happy. So we want to go ahead and we want to inspect the head, right, of our, we wanted to see if we get, I guess, just one column inside the table head, and that column should be named, that should have a value. So if we go cuts.find, and let's say we want to find T head, we want to find the table row, and we want to find, do you use TH for the table heads?
Do I use TH for the table head? That should be a question that I could answer.
One would think.
Oh, you do. Yeah. Yeah. So you are semantically correct, sir.
What you use?
Well,
you get so many burns today.
No burn this time. You are semantically correct, sir. That's good. So we're gonna so I'm gonna use find. So find will find the single th we have, and we're gonna expect that to be 1. If we did find all, it will return us a collection, and then we could take the first one. But since we are gonna be very surprised if there's more than one column because we only have one, property in our data type, we can safely say th, trt, th. And for everybody who's been playing with CSS, you will recognize this as just a classic CSS selector. Now, what do we want? Do we want to look at the text content of the th? That's the one that
sounds reasonable.
Yeah. So there is, not surprisingly, a text context property, and we can say that should be, and I'm gonna copy this up here because is what I assume we expect it to be, right?
I do too.
Yeah. Okay. Should we have a drum roll? While this builds, let me go in and remove target framework and just have the class name because we are not multi-targeting.
Okay, green and red.
It failed.
What did you do?
Okay, so this is good. This is interesting. So this test requires a IJS runtime to be supplied because the component under test invokes the IJS runtime during the test. And then it tells us the invoked method was blazor.internal.virtualize.init. Oh, interesting. So this is now we're really gonna give a little bit on the edge. So you're using the virtualize component under the hood.
Under the hood.
Yeah. This version of bUnit doesn't support visualize, but the nightly build up on GitHub does. So I'm gonna, walk out here on a very big limb and switch to that, so we can continue. And this is let's see. I just need to be sure that I'm in the right folder, and I'm gonna change that to something like that. Okay, so if you, dear listeners or viewers, want to help out with testing bUnit, every time I push something to my dev channel, there is a new version of bUnit being created that pushes, I guess, a nightly build of that with the latest changes to the GitHub package repository. So to be able to download NuGet packages from that, you need to do a few things. I've added a small guide to that here in the top of the discussion for us on bUnit's website, or bUnit's GitHub repository. So, and when you've set that up, you can go into the releases down here, and not releases, packages. And here we will find the latest. Let's see. Here we will find the latest version of the preview one, which has this thing, this git commit hash attached to it, so we know that it's very, very early beta. And let's put that in here. It's a preview of the preview of the preview, or something like that. Okay.
Well, let's be honest. Jimmy would probably prefer using that from anything actually released.
Okay, so let's just double check.
Now this is double testing. We're testing Blossom and pre-release.
Okay, so it's pulled down everything it needs. So well, let's just run the tests again and see what happens.
Come on, test.
Yeah, drum roll. Oh, do I want to use Intelling code? Sure, enable it. And okay, so now we are rendering, but it isn't finding any elements.
All right.
All right. Okay. So why are we not finding any elements?
Well, we did supply data, right?
Yeah. So let's see. Let me try to understand what is going on here. Well, your head is actually being rendered without virtualize, right?
Yes.
Yes. So let's see.
This is the part I like. What do you do when things go wrong?
Yeah.
So what
how do we run the absolutely latest thing possible?
Yeah. So let's have a look and see. Yeah. So let's have a quick look and see what do we actually get out. So now we rendered something, and what you can do if you find yourself in this kind of situation is that you can debug, and then you can go and inspect your component on the test. And I'm going to zoom in a bit for you guys at home, and you can see here we have some of the different properties that are available to us. We have something called the markup, which is just the raw markup that has been produced, and we can see we have indeed produced some markup, but not a lot. And we can see here we have our th, but it doesn't have a column inside it yet. So
what's up with that?
Yeah. So let me try something. So what it could be is that when are we actually getting the data assigned? And when are we actually rendering out the data? And are we doing this asynchronously? So Yes.
We're using the items provider result with the thingy. I'm totally blanking on.
Yeah.
In the meanwhile, we do have a suggestion from the audience.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't see in the chat anywhere.
A column. Yes, we haven't defined a column.
There you go.
We need to define a column as well.
Oh, I think
I
know what
right.
we need to set it to automatically generate the columns, doesn't it? No, wait a minute.
That would work as well. Yeah.
Nice catch.
Okay, so how do we define a column in let's go back here into our so you have to specify grid columns. Okay, but is that still needed if we use so it's just the naming?
Yeah, but what you can do what you suggested. You can do the auto-generate the columns.
Let's try that. Auto-generate columns, and we're going to set this guy to true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now we're testing the documentation as well.
So it's a triple test.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me go in here and.
So the guest speaker and the chat room knows my component better than I do.
Yeah, that's
I'm not
surprised.
No,
that's what we have a chat room for, right? Okay, so now we get a failure, but we get a failure we can understand. So it says cut find text content. We expected that to be comes from attribute with length 20, but string, but it has So basically, apparently, it's not picking up. It's not picking up the attribute. So, am I doing something wrong? Because
I'm not entirely sure if the auto-generate columns will use the display attribute or not. I'm not sure that I have tested that.
Okay.
Actually, that is probably true.
It looks like it.
Yeah. So let's try and add a column as well then.
Okay. So let me this might be a good place for me at least to get to know your project a bit better by going into a Razor test and just seeing how it behaves if we do it like that.
Yep.
So we're just gonna call it Blazor grid Razor test dot Razor, and and I lost my train of thought here. Probably gonna need so if we go to bUnit and we're gonna say write in Razor test syntax, we're gonna need an import just like you do when you're writing regular Razor test, and because we want to have XUnit, we want to bUnit in there, we want to have angle sharp, and let's just throw in everything for good measure. Okay, close this guy down, and now we can go into our Razor file and say it should inherit from test inherits test component base. So instead of inheriting from component base, which is the usual default one we have in Blazor, we have something called a test component base. And now we can say fixture and component under test. And our component under test is the Blossom grid. And this guy wants to have something for input, I think data, and we can just put our data down here, code, and private list data. Oh, let me just go and grab our find class here and put it in here. And test data, new. Oh, and I'm gonna need my, because I'm lazy, I'm gonna need my, well, okay, no, let's just say.
We're all lazy.
Yeah, well, let's just make it a bit more obvious what's going on. So we can say new data. Oh, and it's complaining because it needs, we need this guy. We'd put that into our, where do we have him here? So
Did we check the output the last time? So that it,
yeah.
Right.
Sorry, no, sorry, go ahead. I did.
I was thinking because I'm looking at the code and I think it should be rendering the the names with auto-generate as well.
Okay, yeah, we can have a look. And no, it should be fine. Come on, Razor.
We have from the chat room that it shouldn't be date, it should be data.
Ah.
You're a fire today.
That room requires me to spell correctly as well. Thank you. Okay. So we want to pass in our test data, and we will want to. So in here you have something called grid columns.
Yep.
Yeah, like so. And then you have.
Now I'm. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm actually gonna have to check it out. Yeah, grid column.
Yeah.
Grid columns and then grid column inside of that.
Yeah, grid column. Okay, and what should I put on this?
Just field. So
Field.
supply field.
Roasting the roaster.
And then at name of.
Add name of. And then data.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever we called it, string.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is our sort of our setup. So we can write something in here called a. Now I'm not going to spend time trying to name this because. But so the fixture up here, it takes a test and it has to takes a test method as input. So and you can also give it a nice description. So uses display attribute to name column.
Mm-hmm.
And in here, that's just for brevity's sake. No, okay. So in here, instead of saying render component, we can say fixture.get component under test. So that gives us the same thing we had before, where we render it and passed in parameters like this. But if you have if you want to pass in multiple parameters, or maybe like in this case where we might have to actually pass in templates, nested things, it might actually be easier and faster to just write it out in Razor and get the help from the editor. But we can jump back. And then we can go in here and we can move our assertion in again. And this is going to complain because we are missing this guy. And let's put him into our using statement again here. Like so. And here we go. So now if I go to my test explorer, I have my test here as well. And if we just run everything, we can see if that changes the output.
Come on.
And you can see it even picks up the name of the
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, of course. And in this test again, we also need to add our listener. So so obviously, let's just add a void. Well, let's just can have it inline.
Doesn't he have an unnecessary spacing there?
Hey. Let's see. So we get a fixture in here, and the fixture has the services collection, and that has the add Blazor to it. So that should be it. Obviously, if you have multiple of these in the same Razor file, you can just put this, and you want to have the same setup method for all of them, you can just put that into a method you, for example, put up in a code block up here. So you can have multiple code blocks, and you can even have code blocks inside of tags as I have it here. I just have it in here because it's all belongs sort of to this test, but you can have multiple code blocks in your code. Anyway, let's jump back here and run it again and see what happens. So and we are spinning and we are waiting. And no, it still doesn't want to pick up that that name, but it might not be you. Let's have a look here, and we can step into this and debug a little bit. I'm going to go back here because it's a little less code to look at. So the reason why I default to writing C# based tests is because they are more dense, they're more compact. You can basically have more on screen at the same time. So let's step over here, and we can step in and have a look at our markup. I'm going to zoom in for the rest of you guys. So actually, let's...
There, saw string.
You saw string. Let me see if we can have it shown as XML instead. So it's going to be a little bit easier. No, it's not valid XML.
That was not easier to read.
No, that was nothing there. Okay, let's just see. So yeah, well, now we don't see the markup, but we see how it would look as well. Let's go back to...
So I think what is happening is that it's adding some extra markup for the sorting as well. Perhaps.
Yeah, but
yeah.
So, but we do see the name string here, and then you have but that should be fine. That shouldn't actually be part of it. So the problem is more that we are actually not getting what we expect. We're not getting the as the test rightfully says, we're not getting the expected. Oh, I'm trying to zoom out multiple different ways at the same time. So how do we want to go about this? Should we go in and figure out why it's actually doing this, or if it's not using this display attribute, or because it is clearly generating the columns, but it's just not picking up the name?
Oh, right. They should. For some reason, I thought it was supposed to print out string, but that's not the case, of course.
No,
right.
no. I guess it should be this, right?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So I wonder why it isn't.
So let's assume that part of the component is broken for now.
Sure.
I think. Apparently, I have. So you talked about test-driven development. So now you have written the test, and tomorrow I'm going to do the development for that test, right? That's what the demo was all about for those in the chat. At what we were doing right now.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you guys planned this.
Yeah.
Planned.
So one thing that could be. So if you are actually first, so we can try one short thing here, because something that could happen in Blazor, and something you might be doing, I haven't looked into your code specifically, but what might be happening is that you are first just using the string name, picking that up, but then you are re-rendering a second render where it updates to the right. Sorry, to the right expected name. Does that ring a bell?
Don't think I do, but let's just.
We can do something like this. So because sometimes we run into an issue like this, where we have something in our component that does something asynchronously. Maybe it's waiting for data from somewhere before it actually performs a render, or maybe it renders something and then there's some timer or something else that triggers the component asynchronously to re-render itself again. The problem is this test runs in its own thread. It runs in the test context of, in the synchronization context of XUnit, which is just a fancy word for saying that it has its own thread running in, and the bUnit renderer, which runs the Blazor render, runs the component rendering lifecycle in a different thread. And we need to have two threads going at the same time, because some components, and it's not an uncommon thing in Blazor, we have two components where the component on a test is doing something asynchronously. It might be having it might have a timer for 30 milliseconds before it does something, maybe to sort of work with animations in the front. It knows that I have a CSS animation I just triggered by rendering some class, and then I want to wait, and then I want to do something, it could be something like that. It could also just be that you are waiting for some data to come in, the weather forecast fetched data that is coming in asynchronously. So at first it's just rendering the loading text on screen, and then it's rendering the table afterwards. So if something like that, if you have something in the components that sort of, for some reason or another, has to do something asynchronously, we can tell bUnit or the test thread to wait for this assertion to pass. And what it will do is that every time the Blazor renderer tells bUnit, now I've rendered something, then it will rerun our assertion and try to see if it passed. And by default, it will wait up to 1 second, which is normally more than enough. Normally, you don't, in a test setting, don't have that. Have need for maybe 2 to 5 to 10 milliseconds, because the rendering cycle is so fast when you're just running in test mode, and you don't have necessarily a real web service you're waiting for example. So let's just try this and see if it's just because you're doing some asynchronous magic behind the scenes. And we are running.
What might be the problem is that so I'm checking the code, and it has a title. So it's getting the title based on the field. So the field can't be null, and the type can't be null as well. So I wonder if it might be that you have to set the type as well on the grid column.
Okay.
So as you can hear, I'm not using this feature a lot.
Okay.
So on the grid column.
Sorry, grid column, yeah.
Yeah. So if you set type there.
Type to string?
Well, that no, it should be the let's see, it should be data. I assume that perhaps type of data. I didn't have a sample of this, so we will. There we go.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
Let's try running this guy up here and see if we get anywhere.
Mint cookie.
I think you just say mint.
Oh, maybe.
But hey, cookies.
No.
And mint.
No dice.
All right. Okay.
Still. But we can
back to the drawing board tomorrow.
Yeah, back to the drawing. But we can write the next test, because I think you have a way to specify the name explicitly. So we would want to have that. So not auto-generate columns, but based on I don't know, column based on name. No. Well, okay.
See, what's the hardest part?
Yeah. Okay. So how do we? Well, actually, let's leave this. Let's go in here because it might be easier. So how do I say name here?
Title.
Title, and I'm just gonna, just for fun, just gonna name it foo and see what happens. See if we actually get to see something other than string.
Come on, test.
Well,
it's still gonna fail right now, right?
Yeah. Okay, so now we're actually getting something. Now we're getting foo. That's good.
Yes.
So now we can jump into our test again, and we can
something about the component is working. That's good.
Well, okay. Well, that's the point of testing, Jimmy. That's for finding bugs, right? Or at least figuring out how to use the component correctly. So here we see how to pass in this. This is basically a child component you're passing into the Blazor grid, and we see how to do that in our in Blazor syntax. Let's jump back in here and do it here as well, just so people can contrast. So I have some extra methods here. I have one called add child content, and the first one we want to add is and now I already forgot Blazor columns, right?
Yeah.
Blazor columns. Grid columns.
Grid columns is not a object by itself. It's the name of the child content.
Okay. So it's actually just a parameter. P dot grid columns. And what does he take for input? He takes a render fragment, I assume.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, so we can actually do it like this. We can say you're gonna take, you're gonna add. Now I can't remember my own framework. Oh yeah, so what we're gonna pass into him is gonna be a what's it called? A grid column.
Yeah.
I think that works. No. Oh man. So I just created something that actually was supposed to be quite nice. This is because this is a template. Yeah, the problem is this is the newest bits, and I haven't documented it yet. It's been half a month since I last wrote those tests for it. I'm pretty
You're
sure
really pushing this.
I am really pushing it. Okay. Okay.
But
Well,
that's the fun part.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So for the folks at home, add template. No. Here we go. We can say add child content. Here we go. So our grid columns, he needs something inside him as well. Let's call him GCS. Now I'm starting to remember. and he needs a grid column, I hope. No, can do.
So close.
So while you're figuring that out, for those of you who haven't worked with Blazor a lot, maybe, so the Blossom components has a render fragment, and in that render fragment, you would put in grid columns, and those will render will render on the page, and at the same time register on the parent component. So that's how that works together.
And now I need to find my. Let's see. No. Oh, wait a minute. It's not under. It's under here. I really want to show this off because I worked so hard on it. Let's see. Let's see. Nope, it's in the builder tests, and we want to find the child component. No, so this is a parameter, and it's a render fragment of T, right? Nested object builder. So I probably need to do something like this. Yeah. So this is gonna be a grid column. Okay. Yeah, no complaining.
That's
good.
Yeah. So this is sort of where we get into that territory where it's not particularly, as you can see, this quickly becomes, it's more dense, but it's, yeah. And here we want to, even for this child component, we want to pass in more parameters, right? So we want to pass in dot add for this guy. We want to give it a we want to give it a, what was it we wanted to give it?
a title.
A title, yes. So let me just say, oh yeah, fields. Should this be necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That as well.
Yeah.
So in this case, for this particular component, it feels like the Razor syntax is going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, you quickly get into something where you kind of want to, yeah, this is easily a bit more tedious, but let's just push through, right? String. So this is the field for the grid column, and you can sort of, if you squint a little bit, you can actually see sort of a little bit of the markup structure here. And we also want to have, and also with these nested lambdas, you have to be making sure you don't have like you can reuse p. And we also want to pass in title, and that should be comes from attribute, as we settled. Or we can just call it foo, because now we
that's
I guess we can.
Yeah, and we can move this out of the way. We don't need that. So, and here we expect it to be foo. And let me just reformat everything. And Visual Studio, I don't know. I mean, not even on the preview, but it, null pointer exception from Visual Studio. That's, oh well.
That's business as usual these days.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think it's the new analyzers they've introduced in Visual Studio 2017, and they are sort of iterating over the code, and I guess they're not built stable enough that they actually, the component does not have a child content. So let's see. So I probably wait a minute. Oh, can I just go like so? That might make it a bit easier.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah. So the trick is, Jimmy, once you start writing your documentation for your library, then you actually remember how it works. And this is a new thing. So here we go. Now we're passing. Okay,
Woohoo!
so it wasn't actually as bad as it looked like, but basically it's a way to say for the grid columns, I want to pass in something that renders a single grid column. And I guess if we want to render more columns, we can just go do it one more time and say we're going to add 2 grid columns. That would be equivalent to duplicating this line. But as you see at this point, it's probably easier just to stay in Razor mode for our case here. So let me make this file a little bit easier to work with and move this out here. So we just have some common test data. And we can even have foo and bar here. Okay. And need something here. Okay, so this is very minimal, and that makes sense when you want to test. You could, if you, for example, have something special that happens when you have more than one grid column, then you would obviously maybe want to add that. Maybe, for example, if you want to test sorting at some point.
Yeah.
Let me also move my data class up here. So it's a bit sort of, this is just common code we have. And okay, so this is our first test, I guess. And if you want to, should we continue? I guess we can continue in here for now. let's write a second test or more tests. Let's call this guy test 1, and we can have a test 2 here. Okay, so what is the next test? So now we confirmed that at least we can, get a title out in our component.
Yeah. So the next test would be leaving the title out.
Leaving the title out.
So just rendering the that would hopefully it would render string then.
Yeah. Should we actually test the auto?
Yeah, we can do that
at this point. So that would be because I think then it's just very simple. True, if I can spell, that would be make it more simple. Okay. And
then we will see what it actually does.
Yeah.
I mean, I already know, but
Yeah.
I'm starting to have my doubts.
I don't know. Something like that. That's a good description, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me show off another. If we, for example, now this is not very strict, right? This is we are basically going in and finding the first th. So I guess that's actually a pretty decent way for this, because there's no way that this would break. What we could do instead, though, if for example you started rendering, so right now you are basically writing your th like this, where you have your value in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if at some point you go in and refactor your code so that it renders out like this, or you have it like this, and where do we have that? Up here at the very top, I believe.
It's in the grid. It's in the grid grid column. The grid column component is rendering out the
grid column. Yeah. So here you have a lot of things going on, but if you decided, well, I actually want to break it out in multiple lines because that's going to make my component easier to read, when I develop. That would be completely fair to do, and it wouldn't change the output in the browser for the user. The user would see the same thing. But if we, and I want someone to make check, actually you can just have random markup here in, because it's just a razor file, doesn't really care. But here we expect it to be string, right? String, or even better, we can say name of data dot to make our test refactor then friendly. But if we run now, we will have some test that breaks because we changed the order of your markup in your components. So that is, even though we are not asserting against the entire output of the component like we did in the first test, the hello world just rendering an empty table, we are I need to unpack these guys. Oh, interesting. Is it just, it did run the test, so
okay, it's working, don't touch it.
yeah, well, I think it's just the Razor engine in Visual Studio that's complaining. So actually, this was a very bad example because apparently this white space wasn't a problem at all in this case. But what I would generally recommend you do if you want to write tests that don't get affected by stuff like that is that you just say, well, I want it to be, it should markup match with this, or you can, and then you are absolutely sure that even if you change the indentation, but I think in this case with test context, it actually didn't, it already trimmed it down and removed any white space around it. Oh no, I think I know what it is. It's our friend Fluent Assertion that helps us out. So if we use assert.equals here and say I expect string, and then go like, why you're not helping Visual Studio? Like so.
Our friendly neighborhood.
I'm blaming Visual Studio when it's me who can't hit the right keys, right? But then I would be surprised if this doesn't break. Otherwise, there's some trimming going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of the display of a test context attribute. I'll be damned. Well, bad
there
example.
You go,
but,
some magic.
But yeah. Okay, I guess. But yeah, in theory, if we have had a lot of extra spaces in here, or if we had other insignificant white space, then we would have. I'm just going to undo my changes to your code, but then we might have something we want to consider. I think it's because it's insignificant white space that and I'm only getting the text content out. It's not a problem. But if you run into these things and you have tests that become unstable because you are basically just reformatting your document that you're editing, then doing something like this using markup matches will make sure you don't have any problems with that regard.
Right.
Okay, and hey, it's caught up to us, so that's good. Okay.
Took some while.
So at least it's behaving now like we expect it to. And this is a sort of test that I would, that's the kind of test I would actually probably want to write in C# because it doesn't have a lot of things going on. So let's try another thing, Jimmy.
I'm a little bit curious. What are the upsides of doing it in C#? I mean, you talked about it. It's more compact, but this feels easier.
So
and more readable.
I think that. I guess. And for me, the upside is that the editor here is just better. Hopefully, with the new Razor editor, which is still in experimental mode, Microsoft is working on, will improve a lot on the editing experience. Like there are some issues where if you have formatting things or having the dot helpers, you can get like these guys. What's it called? The refactoring tools. Those kind of things doesn't work particularly well in Razor files, at least not in this version of the Razor editor. So and now that we are in here, I can actually show off a new version, which is in the preview bits that we've just switched to, which allows me to do. Well, actually, I need to create a new component. So let's call that Blazor grid Razor testing 2 tests 2 the Razor. So in here, in this version, we can write a mix that is more close to what we have. Sort of we get a mix of basically the best of both worlds, I guess. So in here, we just inherit from test context like we normally do. Instead of test, and we have our code block. And here we can then create our facts. So if I jump back in here and copy paste a little bit, we can take this fairly ugly example and put it in here. And so this will just run like a regular unit test. It'll show up in your test explorer. So right now, the only problem I have is that the navigate to it doesn't always work. So here, I'm missing something in my copy paste. Am I not? Oh, I'm missing auto fixture. That's what it's complaining about. Let's just add this guy again.
We do have a comment in the chat as well.
Yeah, no, please interrupt me.
Go. There we go.
There was a PR yesterday for the new LSP. What's LSP? That improved auto formatting 20 times.
That's a lot.
I guess that the LSP might be the new Razor editor. I don't know if that's short for that. I hope so, because that sounds really awesome.
The language server protocol for the new editor, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're getting educated.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so
I just want to say that we are kind of running out of time, but I still want to see this. If the chat doesn't have anything, doesn't mind, I would love to continue.
Yeah.
Okay. So right now we still have the ugliness of the still fairly intuitive parameter builder, but it's still not easy to work with. So what we can do instead is, well, here we have our data grid, and I actually haven't tried this out myself. So,
ooh, exciting!
Yeah. So
the chat room says continue.
Yeah, good. Okay. So what we have is a new method called render, and we need to pass it in a render fragment. So in the Razor editor, we can actually have inline render fragments. So this method expects a render fragment, and a render fragment is just some markup that starts with an @ sign. So yeah, and formatting is not a. Am I?
It's apparently 20 times faster.
Yeah. Wait, isn't this right? Or is it?
Thanks.
So I tweeted about this once.
Isn't that always the case? You find it in your own blog if you're Googling something?
No. Let me actually. So if you are like we are doing right now, we are on the bleeding edge of what bUnit can offer, and you are trying out the nightlies. Always, if there's something that surprises you, go and check out the changelog. So I have one rule: I never commit a new version to the nightlies unless I've documented what I'm in the changelog, and that will be the unreleased section you will have to look in under. And here you see we add the virtualize support. Anyway, let's jump down here and see. Oh yeah, so it should be this. Should be okay. Maybe it's just the editor that is still catching up to us. So maybe if I put it up in one line here. Oh. Oh. Hang on.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Okay. So so the question is test data. Do I need to do it like this? Oh, I need to say test data. Yeah. So this is a not lighter, right? And and the title will not match. I'm gonna have to change that to foo.
Kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and if we so you can see there are some small hiccups, like in normal C#, I have this small tingle here. I can click and what's it called? No, small icon, and then I can click run and debug, and I have the test runner in Visual Studio doesn't know that it's completely foreign to it that I'm all of a sudden have a unit test in my Razor file, but I can find it in here and I can run it. And oh, there's a build error. So where did I go wrong? Yeah, okay. So we can't have auto fixture in here because there's something called a fixture in oh, and see, this is what happens. So undo, yeah. Okay, and save. And just to prove to everybody we're actually running, let me just hit enter into debug mode here. Yeah, it's not just black magic.
You're not just faking it.
No. Okay, no compile errors. And building and building and building into debug mode, and we are hitting our breakpoint there. So let's step over, getting a test data, and just to show off what AutoFixture does for us, let me zoom in for you guys. Whoops, here we go. So AutoFixture has created an array of 3 components with some gobbledygook in the properties. Okay, so that's just a quick way to get some test data. And here we call the render. This is a new method that is part of the next release, render method. And it's, oh, wait, what's it complaining about? It's complaining about the resize service. We forgot to trigger some resize service. Okay, no problem. So we can do the same trick as we did in the other class. We can write ctor constructor. We go and add our services to that. Okay, and let's debug again. So sometimes, yeah, so we still need something in here that's like for example the deep integration with the test runner. But other than that, I think this is very cool way of passing in data. Stepping over, rendering, and now we have our component under test again with markup inside it. And zoomy, we see we have a T-body with 3 table rows in it. We haven't written any assertion, any test for that, but you can sort of, I guess, gather where we're going with this. That would be something like going in and asserting that we are actually generating 3 table rows in our T-body tag, and we have our header, and now our assertion here should pass as well. And let me zoom out one more. Oh, wrong way. So this is something that still needs to be refined, but this looks, I think, it looks to be maybe the best way of writing bUnit components when we maybe hit version 1, because it's as soon as you get into a component like this, where there are quite a bit of subcomponents and templates and things you want to pass in and all sorts of stuff going on, then this becomes much easier to write it that way compared to this. And this version up here, which was my sort of first attempt on this, where I use this subcomponent here to capture what you are actually testing and then getting that through the test method. It also has all the benefits of having this. You get the Razor Visual Studio typing experience, and also if you have, for example, a component that takes markup in, all of that just is much easier to work with than having to deal with escaping stuff in strings like this. So that just works much better. We could even, if you, I don't know, so I can keep going all night. I know you have a deadline, so do stop me. But I want to, if you quickly show how this could work as well for this test here. So we copy paste this guy in here and just show that you can mix and match as you will. So we can still use the render component method here and just say, well, this is going to be easier for me just to do it like this instead of using the render method. So render method will just render whatever you give it, whereas render component will render this component for you. So that's where the naming is a bit different, and that's also something I'm looking for feedback on. Here, I can have anything, and it can be any component, any component tree. Here, when I say render component, it will actually create a render fragment that contains this for you, so you don't have to type that out. Anyway, so what I wanted to show off was that if we want to not have to write this markup as a C# string, well, this the inline render fragment functionality also works very well with just strings. So we can just go like this, and here we have all the usual right inside C# code, which is pretty cool, I think. And here we have our another test. So if we run those guys again, you will see that it should also pass.
You shall pass. No, wait.
You
that's
shall not
right.
pass. Oh, and it didn't. And why did it not pass?
Because Jimmy said so.
Yeah, you broke it, Jimmy. Oh, I know. I didn't remove my escapes down here. So fair enough. It actually, so this would also be a breaking change in HTML that you had messed up your, whereas this is still the same. So like using, if you want to use those, what do you call it? Not those guys, but those guys. That's the same. I'm blanking on the English word for those guys and those guys, but you get what I mean, right?
Single quotation? I have no clue what they're called.
Quotes and single quotes. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know.
No, it's right. It's right. You're right. I couldn't even tell you what it's called in Danish, so it's not.
Oh, we can tell you in Swedish. Actually, I think we have it in the chat as well.
Okay.
Try to pronounce this if you want.
No, I'm gonna butch. No, almost. I was. Am I gonna say something dirty if I say that?
No. Enkelfnut. It's just basically a common word for single quotation.
Yeah.
But it's a cute word.
Yeah.
It is.
So a few other things I haven't showed up of would be, so if you're doing end-to-end testing and you're using something like Selenium or Test Cafe or Puppeteer or one of those frameworks where you automate a browser, basically you take a headless browser and you set up your Blazor server or whatever you have, and you tell it to go to an URL, and you get some markup out, and you have some JavaScript or you have some C# that goes in and pokes around, basically like we're doing here, but it instead of using AngularSharp to represent the DOM, you have a real browser behind the back. When you do that, what you don't get is you don't get access to the component instance. The instance of a component you are rendering. And sometimes you want that. Most of the time, you're mostly interested in asserting and working with markup you are generated from the component, but sometimes you want to actually look into the state of the component itself. And you have that available to you through the instance property. And the instance property, if I zoom in, is, as you can see, it's the Blazor grid type here. And it's encapsulated inside the render component, which is what we have out here. We have a rendered component, which contains this. So this is our way to go in and inspect if we have some properties, if we want to, for example, make sure that after we do something that some field has been changed, or selected data changed. We can listen to those, by the way. That's a way to do that as well. But you have access to everything. If you have JavaScript that your component uses, and we actually never got around because you've sort of you don't really have a hard dependency, it seems, on JavaScript in your component. But if you have JavaScript interrupters two-way, you can have JavaScript calling JavaScript. Sorry, you can have your C# component called JavaScript, and you can have JavaScript called back to us. If you have a method in your component where you want to emulate that JavaScript is calling you, well, you just go and call that method directly. And I'm gonna zoom out because it's messing me up. So I think you were telling me that you have something called export data async that would do something, right? That is triggered by JavaScript. Users click on a button somewhere and
so let's take a look here. Let me remind myself of what it's actually doing.
But for the sake of example, then instead of having to then you could basically emulate that click from the user. Another thing we haven't showed off either is, in general, it's quite common to have something that is user triggable, like, for example, your columns. So in this case, we are generating a column. And this guy here, our th, it's clickable, right? You have an unclick event handler on him, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
We have the unclick event here. So, and that should signal to the Blazor grid that now we want to sort by this column. Exactly.
Yep.
So how do we do that? Well, it's quite easy. You just call the click method. And that would trigger the click event handler you most likely have in here somewhere. Sort columns. Where is he? He's down here. Or it, I guess we shouldn't use pronouns for code. So sort column would be called and can sort, and it would call something. I guess this would trigger a render somewhere up in the container.
Yep.
So this container guy up here, he has, and I guess it's this, our friend here, he will have something in here that would call state has changed. Probably not this guy, but somewhere else you have state has changed, and that causes a render. And that would, so when you're clicking that would cause a render, and afterwards there would probably be something in our, and for good measure, we could just, instead of having to query for this every time, we can just say our column equals this, and then we would say column.click, and then we would have an assertion on our column. And I guess there might be something you want to look into that. So maybe you would say, okay, so you have something going on in here related to sorting. Maybe you have some sort of icon that points up or down depending on the sort. Yeah. So that would be a great test for you to write, where you say, okay, well, after I've clicked my column and has something that has changed, then you can go in and say, well, now I expect to have, I don't know what we should find. Maybe we have a subcomponent under column called span that has an attribute on it of some kind now, or
well, that all seems reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can write that test right now if you want. I don't know how much time we have left. I don't want to keep everybody up.
I think we should round off a little bit.
Yeah. So let's do that.
But this was super interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And it seems that I have some test-driven development going on.
Some documentation. Some removing of the spacing.
I can't hear you now.
No.
I think you're going into a tunnel or something.
We are tag teaming you. No, so if I can leave the viewers with for the current beta 11 version, all the documentation is up here, and there is hopefully a good getting started section that will take you through the basics. And if you want to live on the edge,
there's nightly builds.
There's nightly builds. I'm written quite a few tests, so hopefully they're quite stable and there shouldn't be any issues. But if you want to have access to the latest version of the Razor-based test we saw here at the end, and if you want to test a component that use the virtualized component from Microsoft, then you probably want to use the nightly. But so other than that, I think it should be fairly stable to use that. I haven't had any complaints about it yet, so hopefully that should be okay. And other than that, you can go and ask questions in the discussion forum here. If you have a question, you can come in and raise issues if you think you've found a bug, or if you have a good idea or something. If you just have something that might be hard to test, you want bUnit to make it easier for you to test, then either raise an issue or start a discussion and we can talk about it. If you want sort of more live support, I do hang out in here and answer questions in the Gitter channel. And there's also other community members who are hanging out in here and can help out if you run into problems. And if you just want to follow along on what I do, I'm on Twitter at Egil Hansen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, and the chat room seems excited about this as well.
That's great. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and your attention. It's I really love doing these things, and we even get to see some live debugging, error handling, error finding. So that's also, I think,
my
a
favorite
good thing.
part.
Yeah, yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Look at that.
Let me know if you have run into problems, Jimmy, and I'll be happy to pair program a bit with you on this. And if you need more, I can even send a pull request for the first steps we've done here, if you like.
Oh, yes.
I would love to.
Nice.
Awesome. Let's remove that one and talk to you soon.
Yes.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.